All right, good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay. At this time, if everyone rise if able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, at this time, we will open up the first hearing and privilege of the floor. If anyone would like to address the board, please just state your name, your address, and please adhere to the board's 5-minute policy. All right, we will close the hearing and privilege of the board, but remind everybody we do have another one at the end of the meeting. This time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Schwartz for her comments.
Who's going to defer to Dr. Hannes, who's here this evening to talk with us about our most recent result of our work.
Yeah, part 2. We already did part 1. Hello, everybody. Good to see you again.
Awesome. Hello.
Don't need to introduce myself again, I think. We'll save some time once the slides get up and going. Happy to see you again. Hi, everybody on the internet. I am here to share the good work of the part 2 of the assessment. I was here, I don't know, whenever I was here last to talk about part 1, and just a gentle reminder that part 1 was the climate assessment for employees of the district. Part 2, we talked to and surveyed students, parents, caregivers, and the community through several different mechanisms. I'm going to give you an overview of what we found, and happy to answer any questions when I'm done. This just states the overall project goals. Really, in a nutshell, we're trying to understand the climate and where, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion practice, the District of Scotia Glenville Schools is at. This is the overall project activities. Last time I gave you the results of the policy and practice review from an employment standpoint, the staff survey, and the staff focus groups, and the Board of Ed inclusion interviews. The data today will be the bulk of the student, will mostly be about the student focus groups and survey, the survey for the parent givers, caregivers, and community members, and the focus groups for parents. But what we did is also cross-tab some of the data because we use similar mechanisms for data collection. We wanted to show you comparatively what each of the 3 stakeholder groups said about in the same question. So you'll see some cross-tabbing across the 3 different stakeholder groups. But the majority of today is talking about what your students and your parents and your caregivers and your community said. Just as a reminder, we're going to bucket this into 3 buckets: org structure, org process, and org culture. Same methods that we used last time, looking for trends and patterns across the multiple forms of data collection. So here's our data types. In the blue on the left is the focus group and inclusion interview participant by count. So we had 8 participants from student focus groups. I got the pleasure of talking to the students at both the high school and the middle school. You have some great kids. I feel hopeful about the future, speaking to young people these days. So there was 8 students that showed up to those focus groups. The parent caregiver focus groups, I also facilitated most of those. We had 24 parents and caregivers show up to those groups. As a reminder from last time, 63 employees participated in focus groups, and then 6 of y'all participated in the inclusion interviews. If you take a look at the orange, this is the survey response. We did them both by total counts, by number, and then we did it by percentage of response rates. So you'll see a really high response rate and count in the student DEI survey. This was administered during PE. It was all optional, so the students were told they do not have to take it. That's why you'll see, while we had 791 of 7th through 12th graders answer, that's a great number, it's still 66% of all the total students that could have participated. So you still had a little over 30% of students decide not to take it. To me, while we always want 100%, it also means that students felt empowered to say, no, I don't want to take it. They didn't feel forced. With that high of a response rate, the messaging of you didn't have to take this really rung through. But a 66% response rate is really great. We can make some strong claims about the student experience with that kind of response rate. You'll see 79 parents, caregivers, and communities filled out the survey. What you'll see in that 70% is we did a 2-step process for the community survey where we asked folks to sign up first. so that we can ensure and try to do some member checks that we don't have folks that don't live in the community take the survey. That 79 people is 70% of total folks that signed up for the survey. So whatever the other 30% is, I'm not a math person, but your math folks, whatever 30% more of 79 is the total amount of folks that signed up to take this survey. And then the employee response rate, we had 311 employees take the survey at a 58% response rate. So we have a really good amount of data across the multiple forums here. These are just some of the sub-themes that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on tonight within each of these buckets, just to kind of get a little bit deeper into these buckets of org structure, org process, and org culture. So here we are. This is what we're all here for. The major themes that we found across the stakeholders groups is that folks are having mixed experiences, both by stakeholder group, but also by identity. Despite the mixed experience, there's an overwhelmingly strong connection to the district and feelings of being part and feeling part of a larger community. So to me, this is a really good finding that folks are saying we really feel connected to the district, and at the same time, we believe in the possibility of change. We believe that there is room for improvement. There isn't a lot of discouraging feelings around the district. It's, hey, we're having a decent experience and it could be better. There is a lot of talk around the need for more employee training and employee knowledge across all three stakeholder groups. Employees themselves were saying this around the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. They're asking for, they're acknowledging they want more knowledge and training around diversity, equity, inclusion. Students are asking for more knowledge and training around diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as parents, caregivers, and community members. Unsurprisingly, in some of our historically marginalized groups that we've talked about before, there are experiences of inequities within the district based on some of our marginalized identities, and I'll go into more detail a little bit later, but this is pretty consistent across the groups, across the three stakeholder groups. So women employees, girls, and parents and caregivers, students of color, employees of color, families of color out in our community. They're all sharing similar themes of what they're experiencing in schools, with the schools, and with employment. And that leads to this last bullet point here around the emotional and psychological labor that a lot of our historically marginalized groups are saying that they are taking on. One of the big things that you'll find, and I'll say this again later, is that because of some of the homogeneity of the employees, so the lack of lived experience around some of our marginalized identities, the lack of employees of color, lack of employees that have an LGBTQ identity, an immigrant experience, the students and the families that have those identities are doing an overwhelmingly amount of emotional and psychological labor teaching their peers or their colleagues or their community members about what it's like and what their experience is. So that has a lot to do with the kind of homogeneity of the employee base. And then one of the other themes we wanted to elevate here was one of the themes that emerged from 2% of students. So 2% of 791, I did the math before I walked in, I'm not doing it in my head, is about 25 students, responded to the open-ended question, right? We didn't ask this question of them. We asked them, what else would you like us to know about your experiences with teachers and or administrative staff at Scotia Glenville? And they shared that a teacher or administrative staff member have acted quote unquote creepy by saying something or behaving inappropriately toward or around students. So that was an unprompted, we didn't ask, are folks being creepy? They wrote that word. Anytime we use verbatims or quotes, that's coming straight from what the participants are saying. And in this case, this is coming from at least 25 students that took this survey. Not an overwhelming amount, but not a number to ignore, okay? One of the big tools we have across all three surveys was our tolerance thermometer. I showed this last time with employees. I'm going to first show you the students' tolerance thermometer. We asked the question, you remember, as you consider the school environment for these different groups of people, a 10 being fully inclusive, a 5 being tolerant, a 0 being threatening. This is without the numbers attached to it. I first want you to pay attention to the relationship of where they put different groups of people in relationship to each other. I'm going to just draw your attention to a couple of them and then show you some interesting themes across all the data sets. So we see white folks who are wealthy or rich, students in a single parent guardian household, and people who are Christian kind of falling in this top part of the thermometer. And then we see boys, folks of color, English as a learned language, and girls. So the relationship between boys and girls is, they're not in total separate sides of the thermometer, but they are a little bit away from each other. Folks who are not Christian, folks who are not U.S. citizens. And then here at the bottom of the student tolerance thermometer, poor folks, folks with disabilities, and then we have our LGBT folks and our trans folks at the close to the bottom, and then students who are parents down there at the bottom with LGBT folks. Okay, this is the actual numbers that the students shared and the student standard deviation. So the mean is the mean; it's the average score across all of the students, giving a 0 to a 10. You'll see that the highest is a 9.9, the lowest is a 5.82. I'll show you this number in a minute, but the students rated almost across all of these groups lower, certainly lower than employees, and often lower than parents, caregivers, and community members, almost consistently lower in all categories. That's something to pay attention to. What I'll say, and this is true across a couple other clients that we have, when we compare employees in a community to other stakeholder groups, like other school districts, and we poll employees versus students or caregivers, the numbers are much lower to those folks who are not employees. There tends to be a positive skewing by folks that work for an organization because they're either afraid of retribution or they just positively skew their work environment. So the students, we like to say students tell the truth. So if they're given trans folks, if their numbers are low, around a 5, I think that's probably an accurate number because they're experiencing it day in and day out. The other thing to pay attention to on this thermometer is the standard deviation. If you remember from last time, the higher the standard deviation, the more disagreement. So the places where you have representation and lived experience, there is less disagreement around where folks are putting them on the continuum, on the thermometer. The places where you have less representation within your community, your students, your employee base, is where there is more disagreement. Something to pay attention to, that those who do not have the lived experience don't always have the accurate representation of how good or bad or in between it is. It's something to factor in. Let's take a look at the parent or caregiver tolerance thermometer. You'll see some similar groups around the top and the similar placement of these of groups along the way. So again, we see folks of high socioeconomic status or affluent or rich folks at the top, white folks, Christians. Parents and caregivers put boys and girls at the higher end of the tolerance, higher than students did. But folks of color, again, we see are in the middle. Those with parents or caretaking responsibilities, English as a learned language, those that are not Christian. They rated the organization a little bit higher for folks with disabilities than students did. And then similar placement of poor folks, people of low socioeconomic status. And then parents also put LGBT folks and trans folks at the bottom, as well as people who are not U.S. citizens and people who are students who are parents. So we see some overlap there between what the parents are saying the environment is for these different groups and what students are saying. And then here are the actual numbers. Again, what you'll notice in the next slide is that parents and caregivers rated the groups much lower than employees did, closer to where students did. Same trends of there is more disagreement, the places where you have the least lived experience among the community and among employees. So what this slide does is compare all 3 stakeholder groups to each other. You'll see all 3 stakeholder groups put trans folks at the bottom. With the missing numbers in these are groups of people we did not ask certain groups about. So we didn't ask students or parents or caregivers around the experience of active military or veterans. We didn't ask students around people with parental or caregiving responsibilities. We didn't ask employees or parents or caretakers around single parent guardian household, and we didn't ask employees around students or parents. So there's some, anomalies here in terms of the constructions of the survey, but the consistency we see is that there are lots of overlaps of where each stakeholder group put the different groups of people at both the top and the bottom. And the folks in the middle all are kind of swirling around the middle together. Some might be a little bit higher than other, but they're really all, they're all kind of in the same third of that tolerance thermometer if we're breaking it up into threes. So from a research standpoint, it's telling us that there's some saturation here of what the themes are, and there's general agreement around what the perception of the culture and the climate is across these three different stakeholder groups. And you can feel pretty confidently that this is the perception of where the district is at for these different groups. I'll just give you a second to look at the actual numbers. Why didn't we ask all the same? It's a good question. We felt like there were certain groups that didn't have as much like knowledge, or it might confuse. So the places where we didn't ask were places where we felt like there wasn't enough knowledge to factor in for example, students wouldn't know if people in active military or veteran status, they don't have any peers that are in active military or veteran status, or not interacting that on a regular basis. All right, some of the combination of the qualitative data and the quantitative data. In terms of organizational responsibility, there is strong belief in diversity, equity, and inclusion across all stakeholder groups. And adult stakeholders, so both employees and parents and caregivers and community members, see schools as welcoming, but with space to be more inclusive. Had a really strong percentage of 94% of parent and caregivers respond that they either somewhat agreed, or strongly agreed with the statement that I think Scotia Glenville School District should prioritize all students feeling included at school. So again, this feeling of like there is a strong belief in the importance of this. It often means like, do we all agree, and are we all behind the how? How do we translate that strong sentiment and that connection of the school being inclusive, or needing or wanting or should prioritize feelings of inclusion to action? We take a look and we pay attention to hierarchy. The district is hierarchical and bureaucratic, like many educational institutions. It is not unique to Scotia Glenville. It is across all educational institutions. It's across many institutions. The goal here, I'm not saying that we should get rid of the hierarchy. We could always probably do less with bureaucracy. I think we can all agree with that when it's in our control. But the goal here is to try to reduce the impact and the feeling of the hierarchy. So making sure that folks aren't acting on power dynamics just because they have power doesn't mean that they should use it just because. And being really conscious of power dynamics is going to be really important. And so then leads to the second bullet point. Power imbalances. Students have some awareness of power imbalances between students and staff. They can feel it, they can see it. It's a thing. Young people feel powerless often, but they have an awareness around it. And students are frustrated by their lack of power and voice. And parents and caregivers may be encountering a similar dynamic around feeling like they lack a power and voice. When it comes to compositional diversity, the homogeneity of the district came up across stakeholder groups, all three. However, in terms of the student population, the district is a district that is diversifying both racially and socioeconomically. Homogeneous employee population means that students with marginalized identities are less likely to see their identity represented on staff or by those teaching them. So, the impact of having a homogeneous staff is that students don't see themselves reflected. This could be true racially, this could be true with LGBT identities, could be true for students with disabilities, it could be true in many other kinds of factors. One of the things about in our more racially homogeneous, I say that word every day and somehow I can't say it right now, homogeneous communities is that there is also a lot of diversity in other ways, and the better we get at talking about diversity in all the other ways, the more comfortable and the better we will get at talking about racial diversity. It's not one or the other. We just have to be really good about elevating and amplifying diversity across all these different social identities, and then also holding ourselves accountable to paying attention and to the racial diversity. Transparency in decision-making and communication. So students express a desire to be more heard by teachers and administrators, and students also want to listen more to one another. There is a deep desire to hear each other more. Parents and caregivers identified a parallel desire regarding communication from teachers and administrators, and then employees, parents and caregivers, and members of the Board of Ed all see a need for improved communication with an eye toward being proactive and transparent. So similar theme across all the adult stakeholders. Some stuff around process of retention, promotion, performance evaluation. Almost a quarter of student survey respondents experienced their teachers as not really caring about teaching or student learning. So almost 25% of the students shared that with us. They said that they didn't feel like their teachers really cared about teaching or student learning. Remember, this is a perception survey. It may or may not be true, but it's what students are feeling. In contrast, parents and caregivers in the majority of their focus groups expressed that they experienced their children's teachers as effective or impactful. And then the lower scores on the survey on items related to mentorship may be one explanation for why teachers are perceived by students as not caring about teaching or learning. So, feeling like they want more mentorship, wanting to have more connection with their teachers, and that might help bridge that divide between students not feeling like their teachers care about them or care about their learning. There's a relationship gap potentially there. Processes for culture of accountability. So both parents and caregivers and students noted discipline and related behavior interventions as an area of improvement. I heard a lot of this from girls in the middle school focus group around feeling like they are policed more, particularly when it comes to dress code, than their boy peers. Students want more consistent application of policy by teachers and administrators, addressing bullying, use of slurs, and discriminatory language. So they're looking to the adults in the schools to intervene and be proactive. The majority of students are not experiencing their teachers and administrators as effective preventers or interveners in bullying or discrimination. This corresponds back to the employee survey that employees shared with us, that they desire and want and need more training and knowledge in this area to be interveners, to be preventers of the bullying and discrimination. So the desire is there from both the employees and the student standpoint. And students are experiencing teachers and administrators engaging in bias and discrimination with disciplinary decisions. So there's a lot around the inequitable application of disciplinary behaviors from the student data. Parents and caregivers seem to have a more mixed and positive experience when it comes to culture of accountability, generally feeling that bias and discrimination are adequately addressed. The places where parents and caregivers and students are aligned, at least 1/3 of both the parents and caregivers and student respondents think that they would not be appropriately supported if they reported harassment or discrimination. So that's 1/3 of respondents from both of those stakeholders having concerns about any reports of harassment or discrimination not being adequately responded to. And they're reinforced by policy that are vague enough to allow for inconsistent and potentially biased or discriminatory application. So, part of the larger report that we shared with y'all gives some policy level recommendations that relate to students around places where the policies could be vague. Or inconsistent or not clear enough that would, in theory, they're fine policies, but they lead without some more specifics or shape to them, they could be inequitably applied. And that's what we're hearing from students and caregivers, that they're inequitably applied. So then the last bucket here, feelings of inclusion overall. Overall, students feel welcome. So 85% of students said they feel welcome, and 83% said they feel safe at school. So back to my earlier theme, there's a high level of connection and feeling of welcome and safety. However, almost half of students feel excluded by other students, so 42%, and like they cannot be their whole selves at school. So 43% sure they can't be their whole selves at school. Parents and caregivers overwhelmingly experience their children's school as welcoming and safe and feel connected to the school community. However, almost a quarter, so almost 25%, reported that their students are regularly bullied at school by other students. If we take a look at feelings of inclusion from our historically marginalized populations, so students of color, folks with disabilities, LGBTQ+, poor students, both students and caregivers and parents reported they have aspects of their identities that they hide at school. So 62% on the student standpoint and then 31% on the parent-caregiver standpoint. Students are experiencing harassment and or discrimination at least once a month and as often as, quote unquote, more times than I can count because of who they are for both peers and teachers. Smaller percentage from teachers, but still 7%. And students identified several kinds of bias and discrimination they had observed or experienced, including racism, homophobia, transphobia. We asked around their experience with bullying around size and fat phobia and sizeism, sexism, and ableism. So we think about all the ways kids' bodies are growing and changing, and identity is really important. They're all wrapped up in these things: race, gender, sexuality, size, gender, I already said gender, different forms of gender, and ableism. Some other points here around historically marginalized groups. Students are experiencing issues including bullying, particularly around targeted identities, and those concerns are often going unaddressed. And this second bullet point is really to my earlier bullet point is that it's not from teachers not caring. That's not coming through the data. It's more about teachers are not seeing it, or they're not recognizing it. And this could be from a lack of lived experience. So when you don't have that shared experience, you're able to identify the bias or identify the discrimination because you yourself have not experienced it. A lot of it, we think, is contributed to the lack of lived experience. And what needs to happen in lieu of that lack of lived experience is heightened training around it so that they can see it, they can recognize it, and they know how to intervene and or educate around it. You're not going to radically diversify your staff overnight. That's not going to happen and necessarily shouldn't happen that fast because that would be strange. But there is other things that we can do to give folks the knowledge that they need to be able to be interveners and not put all the responsibility of the interventions on students. And so, again, it's not a red flag that teachers here don't care. Actually, it's the contrary. People feel like they feel very connected and very cared for and safe and welcomed at school. But it's the lack of seeing and understanding what's going on in these kind of nuanced ways because folks don't share that lived experience that teachers and employees and adults in the schools are not intervening to the degrees that students are asking or are needing. A couple more things here. Inclusive leadership. Students are having a mixed experience with administrators. Most student respondents did not have feedback about the administration, unsurprisingly, but the ones that did, 2% described them as great, 1% described them as average, and 1% revealed that they had observed or experienced bias or discrimination from administrators. So this, coupled with conflict avoidance and an employee experience that is dependent on school or building administrators, it raises concerns about who is positioned to confront leadership when needed and sounds a call for inclusive leadership that can hold one another accountable. So how can leaders hold themselves accountable to each other? If the power dynamics, remember that comment about hierarchy and bureaucracy earlier, if the power dynamics are very top down, that needs to change, but also the folks that have the most power, that are peers to each other, need to have a good culture of holding each other accountable. Team dynamics and connections to colleagues and peers, like the employee experience being dependent on building or school leadership, parents and caregivers and 3/4 of focus groups noted that the students' experience is dependent on their teachers. Parents and caregivers also, their connection to their students' school is typically highest in elementary school and gradually drops off as students advance into middle and high school. And there are barriers to being involved for parents and caregivers, particularly balancing work and parenting and socioeconomics, so their financial status. And then unsurprisingly, popularity is a factor in peer dynamics and connections for middle and high schoolers. So we got regular kids out there that are experiencing popularity as a factor. Team dynamics and connections to colleagues. This is from the last report, but just as a reminder, the employee experience is dependent on building and school leadership. And this is a repeat slide. I'm sorry about that. Here are the data examples on the right around where we pulled those themes from. So that's the end of the data. With all 3 stakeholder data groups combined, you'll see that we place the district on this maturity model, not in terms of compliance and legal compliance. You certainly are in legal compliance from what we can see. We are not lawyers. But in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, maturity as an organization, putting you right about compliant, with the data that we've provided and the recommendations, no doubt have the firm belief that you could make some changes to move along this continuum and have progress and use the investment of all of this energy that really your whole community has given, has poured into you, to make some changes and find out what's really working and how to improve. So some recommendations, this is not all of them, but just some that we pulled up for today. Develop and integrate a DEI commitment and vision language that emphasizes equity, inclusion, and addressing systemic inequities. Right? We got to be careful not to be performative. We really have to make sure that our language lines up with our action. Create DEI strategic goals and potentially a strategic plan. Identify a senior staff member to help support and spearhead the strategic DEI goals. Thinking about putting someone professionally responsible for at least the implementation and the progress of the work. And then explore the creation of affinity groups or identity-based student resource groups. So things like a BIPOC student caucus or an LGBT student group or a disability group at Scotia Glenville. This will help students see themselves reflected more and feel empowered, potentially use these groups as a voice for the students within the organizational structure. They're often used as a place of empowerment, but administrators and teachers can go to these groups and ask about what their experience is and ask what changes they recommend. And so any kind of group that can have students feel empowered and feel connected and have a purpose, I think would go a long way within the student experience. Create a system to track the social and school identities of students who are disciplined and their consequences, as well as tracking which teachers, administrators, and staff made the decision not to micromanage, but to understand themes and patterns and trends so that we can ensure that we are removing bias as much as possible. Make sure that teachers, administrators, and school counselors are on the same page with punishable behaviors, levels of punishment, essentially consistent enforcement of the policies. Find ways to be transparent about the school's disciplinary policies with parents and caregivers, identify when they should be brought into the process, and make sure that teachers, counselors, administrators, everybody, all the adults should be engaged in the process. And explore where and how socioeconomic barriers can be removed for both students and parent caregiver engagement and involvement. Just a couple more here. Create opportunities like dialogue sessions for teachers and administrators to deeply listen to and hear students, with similar opportunities for students to do the same. Develop new communication channels or lean into existing ones to better connect and communicate with parents and caregivers. Explore and implement new low-barrier ways for parents and caregivers to engage with students, schools, and teachers. And explore and implement ways to build trust with students so that, for example, if there's a teacher who is quote-unquote being creepy, students will feel confident and safe reporting it. And then last year, enhance required training with the DEI curriculum that includes learning and development sessions for all employees to shore up that gap of what lived experience is not providing. Like I said, there's more recommendations in the full report, but these are the ones we wanted to highlight for today. And then the next steps will be to socialize the report to admin, council, and staff, and then find the avenues to share results with parents and caregivers, students, and the community, and then explore how to translate this all into more action. So that's what I got for you. As always, you're probably on the border of whelmed and overwhelmed, but happy to answer any questions that you may have.
You said that you have some policy suggestions. That's fantastic. We're in the midst of reviewing all our policies, so that would be great and timely if you could provide those.
For sure, my colleague, Dr. Bree Becker, is very good at policy recommendations, and so the report has a lot of them, and happy to talk them through. Yeah. Any other questions?
No, thank you. Great. It was great.
All right, y'all. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the investment in this.
Certainly, Dr. Hannes, if folks have questions, they can send them to me, and I can send them on to you. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to a few discussions. First, the senior citizens age exemption. Drew?
So as part of our continuing migration of increasing it by $500 per income threshold, we're asking the board to give us the go-ahead so that we can have the public hearing tomorrow and increase the bands by $500. The write-up's in your packet, if there's any questions.
Go around the room, questions? Kim?
No. No questions.
Questions over here? Gentlemen?
All for it.
All for it as well. All right.
And that's why we need you tomorrow night, so that after the hearing, you can approve that so we can move forward.
Right, so that's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock for the hearing, and
Correct.
right after a special meeting.
And that's the only topic.
Right, thank you. Back to you for the discussion on the school bus proposition.
So in your packets, a memorandum from me to the superintendent outlining the purchase of a 72-passenger bus, I think it's 57-passenger wheelchair accessible bus, and a Suburban for special transportation. The cost is outlined in the memorandum. There's no impact on the 23-24 budget. I did provide the amortization of the bonds versus the aid and the impact on the 24-25 budget. And I also provided the outstanding serial bonds and related aid of the previous bus propositions. So I'm asking for the board discussion and then the go-ahead to bring it to you as part of the May proposition.
Beautiful. Start on this time. Any questions? All for it? Yes.
Is this the typical rotation where one set's being paid off and we're kind of bringing new ones to retire buses that are older?
With the, as you know, the caveat of one of the buses is out of service so much that it's kind of going against the 10-year or $100,000 mile type of thing, but we feel it's prudent because it's off the road so much to bring that one. We also wanted to, again, because Rick, it was your initiative about the auction, and I promised I would do it, and we did it last year, and you saw the benefits between what the trade-in would be to what we realized in the auction. We're going to continue that. So I want to thank you for that initiative.
We do it every year. I think we should keep doing it every year. We've got to have buses that are in good shape and we can rely on.
Same.
Jim?
I think same.
Bring it to the board, Drew.
Thank you.
Discussion on the state aid analysis budget 23-24.
Thanks, Hal. So get in your packets a memorandum to the superintendent that outlines the governor's proposal. The governor provided the runs on February 1st, which is a little later than typical because in an election year, the budget usually comes out on February 1st, not the previous week. So what I wanted to show you was the key was foundation aid due to the consumer price index being 8%. Our foundation aid went up about 8%, which I had projected earlier. We're fully funded, so there was no other upside of that. And it's mitigated too by our declining enrollment. So you might see surrounding districts like Mahoneson and Shelmont got a substantially increase in foundation aid that we didn't. But we did get 8% overall. I did do a differentiation between what the governor's run showed to what I'm going to bring to you at the end of February for our runs. I kind of outlined that. The biggest thing there is that transportation aid will be about $1.9 million, not the $688,000 that the governor's showing. She's grabbing a number from 11/15/23 that we corrected through a clerical error, and we're getting the money this year. And we'll get it next year, but I wanted to show you that if you're looking at the governor's runs, our aid is different. It always is. It's my job to vet it out and bring you a responsible state aid budget. So if you have any questions on what I wrote the superintendent, I'll be glad to answer them.
That's very thorough. Thank you. Dave?
All good.
Thanks, Rick.
Jim? All good. Thank you, Drew. Just keep your roll with discussion on the tax cap calculation.
So the tax cap, as again outlined in the memorandum, we're looking at this point, a 4.33% increase. As you know, the tax cap is predicated on 2% cost of living or inflation. Well, inflation was at 8%, so we come back down to the 2%, and then you calculate exclusions, which, as I outlined, our pilots are going down, which helps your tax cap. The reason our pilots are going down is Target is coming off the pilots and going on the tax rolls. That's $136,000 decrease, mitigated slightly by other pilots going up a little bit in their formulas. But the pilots going down by $65,000 gives you more room under the cap. It's just how the formula works. And then our debt service, which is called the capital exclusion, is going up, which is our debt service less the building aid that we get for that. So we're having more net debt on the books, and that's attributable to the $12.8 million project. The debt's coming on the books, and also the aid in 23-24. So we're going up 2.3% more than the 2%. So that's just your maximum allowable exclusion. I bring it to you today just so I get your feedback, because on March 1st, we have to go to the comptroller, OSC, and say if we're going to override the tax cap. It's not binding up until the board adopts a budget, but I'll be glad to entertain any questions on what I wrote to the superintendent.
All right, so we'll open this up for questions or discussions. So what we need to do is to give Drew and Susan an idea if we're okay at the tax cap. We would like to entertain going over the tax cap.
So if I've got this straight, our tax cap is like 4.6%, is that what you just said?
4.33.
4.33. So we can increase the budget by that much and still have a regular 50%.
You can increase the
majority.
tax levy, which is the
Okay.
amount of taxes we generated from the tax rolls.
Which is that number that we always try to keep under 3.
Basically, last year, we were at 1.61% on a 1.62% cap. So it all depends on what the expenditures look like, which you don't know yet, because
Right.
we haven't brought you that.
Well, it sounds pretty good to have a 4.3 with all the years we've had all these little lower numbers, and I think it's kind of exciting to have that much. We'll see when we actually get the budget how it affects us, but it's a much nicer number than we've had the 1.6s and that type of stuff.
0.27 at one point, we had that one year.
Yes, I remember that year. So,
Yeah, I agree. This going into this budget season and looking at what we had to do last year, knowing what we were coming into this year with, I was already looking at what that tax cap would be and where we would have to be if we wanted to go over, but seeing a 4.33
Yeah.
is delightful.
And that's about $168 more in taxes on a house, $160,000 assessed value, just for, throw that out there, just because you always ask me that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You read my mind. Emily?
I was going to say the same thing, and it's, as we discussed a little bit, I wasn't here last year, but there was no need to go over, and now, and with this bigger number, it sounds like there's a larger margin. Well, there is a larger to work with, so that is very exciting.
Kim?
I am looking forward to, being able to play with that 4.8 because we're so used to being 1.6 and how scary,
Right.
So I'm comfortable with that.
Great. Rick?
Looking forward to the budget season, yeah. I mean, not like we have to spend, all of that, but it's nice
Right.
not to have that crunch that we've been dealing with, so.
That heart attack when you see the
It
numbers.
it is nice to have a little bit of breathing.
It'll make
So-
our untouchables a lot easier this year, I
Yes.
think. Mr. Massaro?
Ditto.
Beautiful, so there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Drew. Good job as always. Item number 10, discussion by Pam and Rick on our board policies.
well, we promised Susan we would keep this short because
Okay.
it's a really long night. But first of all, I sent you the different questions for the zeros and the 1,000s. And for consistency, I would like the superintendent to be referred to the same way through all the policies. So what we did on the 2,000s and 3,000s, we called it the superintendent. In these, they're saying the superintendent of schools or SOS, and I would like to just make it consistently the superintendent. So that's what we're putting forth, is that we do that, make it the superintendent from front to back.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds good.
It's easier.
Okay. Then on policy 1500, we need to update the information for how people, the community reserves use of our facilities. We now have a new system online that we use that's different than what's in the policy, so we need to update it so it agrees. The third thing is that policy 1511R, which is a regulation, and policy 1551R are duplicate policies. They are both on advertising in the schools, and they're both absolutely identical. So I suggest we get rid of one of them.
I agree.
Any, no problems? Okay. And then in policies 1741 and 1741R, they use IHIP, which is Individual Home Instruction Plan. And a lot of times during these, they put IHIP. I personally, and it's a personal opinion, and you're welcome to overrule me on this, my personal opinion is if you've got something that's formal writing and a formal document, you don't use abbreviations. You write it out. But it's up to you guys.
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
all for no acronyms because
Right.
it's hard.
Okay.
There's too many.
And then the last one on policy 0310 talks about the board having an annual time where they sit down and evaluate board procedures. And with COVID, we really haven't done that lately. So that's something I think that should stay in the policy, but I think we should think about doing it. Now, in the meantime, since we've gotten to here, Rick and I have done the 4,000s. Yes.
So Pam, there was a note, Liz Fawcett, our library media specialist at the high school, is excellent about keeping our policies that affect the library up to date. This summer when she met with Susan and I, she asked if it would be possible to review 1420, to put a timeline in, to say that's the complaints about curricula or instructional materials, that we could put a timeline in that says once a decision has been rendered, those same materials, that decision will hold for one calendar school year. So if you and Rick could consider that, if the board could consider putting in a timeline for when a decision, so the complaint comes forward, we go through our process, and then a year that same material can't be challenged, say the following day, that decision would stand for a year. If that's something that you would consider.
I think it sounds really good. I mean, you know, with somebody protesting it, and the next day somebody else coming in and protesting it, and
Yes.
that type of thing. What does everybody feel?
Yeah, I agree.
No, I think our policy should be flexible. We should decide when, so if in 2 months something changes, we shouldn't say, oh, well, it's good for a year. I don't agree with that. I think we should, be able to change our policies whenever the board decides, it makes sense. I don't know unless there's a real good reason why we wouldn't want to do that.
So if you, green eggs and ham, there's a curricular challenge on green eggs and ham being available, excuse me, in the library. We go through our process of looking at green eggs and ham and we say, this is appropriate for student use, this is appropriate for teacher use. We make that decision and then we would say that someone could not challenge the use of green eggs and ham, that one particular piece of curriculum or content, for a calendar year. So that's what Liz was proposing, so that if we pulled the committee together, which is a librarian, a teacher, an administrator, a parent, it's outlined, the process is outlined in 1420, saying that decision would stand for a year so that someone couldn't say, okay, I didn't like your decision, I'm going to challenge the same curricular material, the exact same one, green eggs and ham, the following day. And then we would have to go through our process all over again for that same piece of curriculum.
Yeah, I see your point. And the reason that I would be okay with it is just because that would be expensive if we did that every single day. I can just time in money. So I guess I see it, but man,
Would you be more comfortable with from the challenge date in that discrete school year? So, because most likely green eggs and ham is taught at a certain place in the curriculum. It's not that green eggs and ham is taught in semester 1, 2, 3, and 4. So
For Karen, is that reasonable, what you previously suggested? Because parents can request an alternate assignment.
correct?
So if you're the parent who didn't like green eggs and ham, and they rule that, the committee rules that it has met the curricular status, we're going to continue to use it. You as a parent still can ask that your child be given different material. So there actually is
It's a request, so I just want to they can make the request, so.
and generally we have honored that request
Correct.
because we haven't had too many.
So Karen, can you send what you just said? I mean, I
Sure.
think you read it up there.
I'd be happy to.
And we can
Green eggs and
look
ham
at it and
only.
consider it,
Absolutely.
see Rick and I can talk about
I
it
am saying
next meeting and
that's a
see
different
what we feel.
What if it was a
Thank you.
specific
Okay.
thing?
I appreciate the consideration.
No problem. Back to the 4,000s. The only changes in the 4,000s are grammatical, too many spaces,
just send it to us.
and a couple titles that need to be updated. So therefore, I don't have anything, or we don't have anything to ask you about, except the fact that there's a form for the computers that we don't have any other forms in the policy. They're all, you know, so why do we have just this one? I asked Susan, she said, because it's something that the new hires deal with immediately, but that she also uses it in what she does with the new hires. So she's open to not having it there. I don't know what you guys, it's kind of weird to have one form right in the middle of everything, but that's, and they are given it, so
Is it
is
just
it
a
a,
handy place to refer people to say this, go use this link to fill out the form?
Probably at one point in time it would have been Rick, but now that we have Martha Moran onboarding everybody, she's got the packet that people fill out as they come in, and agreeing to our policy for computer usage is part of that packet. So I said to Pam, I wouldn't, now that we have somebody who actually onboards people, I'm not sure would have to have the policy also there. Or you could, I suppose in theory, append it to one of the regulations as the sample, but the actual place you fill it out is when you're hired. It's kind of like when folks sign your yearly commitment to be a board member. That form is not part of board policy. That's part of what you do as becoming a board member. That's the only similar example I could think of.
So yeah, we're kind of petitioning the rest of the board to say, does it make sense to you? Susan's saying it's not crucial that we have it as part of our policy. It's simply a form that was pasted in to our policy. So everybody that goes to read our policies has the opportunity to see what the form looks like that our employees fill out. So
It just doesn't seem like it's needed. It doesn't seem like
No,
it
and-
needs to be in there.
one of the problems too I saw with it is the help desk number is wrong because we've changed it and whatever. So I don't think we want wrong phone numbers in our,
And we,
in the
right,
policies. And if they're given the form, then it's there. And I assume that she would keep up the proper phone number. So,
Yeah, I think we could probably
it
take
could
it out.
also be an appendix. I think we have other appendices that can be kept there if you don't want to have it in the policy.
Let's remove it.
Yeah, just remove it. It just doesn't
Yep.
need to be there.
Or just remove it.
remove it.
Emily? Okay.
Okay, and the last thing for me is that Susan has received some draft policies back from Erie One BOCES, and I think we're gonna meet next week.
I think so.
We need to get a date.
Yeah.
So the three of us are gonna meet next week and look at what BOCES has sent back and what we have done.
Well, whenever it's convenient to you guys, because I
Well,
don't know.
both of us are free anytime next week from 3:30 to 5.
Okay.
So we had sent that back in an email.
I know you were not available Monday. I think.
Not Monday, right, Monday's a holiday, they're on, Susan's not available Monday either, it's a holiday. President's Day. So, okay, I hope that was quick enough.
I appreciate all that, guys.
Great, thank you
Well,
very
that's
much.
what
Thank you.
happened tonight.
All right, we will move on to our reports. And we will start with CAPSPA. So over the last several weeks, I've reached out via email to all other local school boards within like a 10-mile radius. Their presidents, we've had good communication. The majority of them are open and want to know more about CAPSPA. Today I had a 45-minute conversation with Kathy Lewis that it's basically gone away. During COVID, no one really did anything. It's defunct. So we are working with NYSBA to find the bylaws when CASPA was a thing, and we're going to review that, and then they are going to be sending out a survey to us, as well as the other CAP region schools, to find out the need for it and what they're looking to get out of it. So it's positive. I can't tell you it's definitely on again, but a lot of positive feedback from the local presidents. So as soon as I have more information, I will report to everybody. Legislative.
There isn't much going on. When I did the bulk of the work a few months ago, there was an update. There's some online opportunities if folks want to go look at some webinars. I can share that with the rest of the board if they'd like. But otherwise, nothing to report.
Great, thank you. PTA?
There's not a lot to report right now. All the PTAs have chosen their Founders Day recipients, so congratulations to all those recipients. And a lot of the PTAs are talking about really working together on sharing some of their BOCES programs. So if one's doing one, really collaborating on a few things. Lincoln did a literacy night with the and math night with the teachers. They did an amazing job. And so Sacandaga kind of wants to figure that out so that we can all do that next year as a math and a literacy night. So we've kind of started those conversations of maybe collaborating some of our PTA functions together. So that's really all report so far.
When is Founder's Day?
Founders Day is March 22nd. Those should be going out for approval and then going out to the schools for online for people to be able to sign up. Did it come out today? I saw the email like earlier, but I didn't read it. So, yes, and it is at the Lighthouse, and it's $30 a meal.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Audit Committee.
So Questar 3 has finished the risk assessment for the year and the Medicaid audit. So in the spring, we'll bring the audit committee together when we get the draft reports.
Great, thank you. Policy we just went over. Let's see. Board of Education goals. We haven't done a lot with those other than keep working on our policies, watching our communications, and then obviously as we roll into our budget season here. So does anybody have anything on that?
I'm just curious, we talked about a
Sorry.
board retreat.
Yes.
Are you folks interested in something that's adjacent to a board meeting, or do you want to find a separate time for that?
I'm fine with either, as long as we have enough notice.
It would be my first one. I would be excited either way, wherever, however, yeah.
We've done them from like 5 to 7 before a board meeting and had dinner. And I think that has always worked really well.
I'm good with that.
Yep, okay,
Okay.
great.
We're open.
Thank you.
And that's kind of what we're talking about with this policy that we talked about that we haven't done for a while. I think that could go hand in hand.
All right, moving on to item number 12. A motion for the non-resident student tuition rates for 22-23.
I'll move the Board of Education approve the non-residential student tuitions as submitted.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Questions? No questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Or abstain? So moved. Thank you. Resolutions 13, 14, 15, and 16 can be moved. However, in resolution number 13, the last sentence there where it says in the amount of $48.10, it should say to the general fund supply account as submitted, not what it says. We just need to change the word to supply.
I'll make the motion that we approve resolutions 13, 14, 15, 16 as submitted and amended for approval.
Thank you, sir. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved. Thank you. Motion for item number 17, a resolution to increase the debt service reserve fund.
I'll move that we increase the debt services reserve fund as noted.
Thank you,
second.
sir. Thank you. Questions? Nope. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved. Thank you. Resolution item number 18, to appoint an interim administrator for the district.
I'll move that we appoint the interim administrator for the district as written.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Any questions?
What's the purpose for this interim administrator?
They're the third in a long line of interim APs at the high school.
Ah. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved.
Hopefully the last, Rick.
Motion for resolution number 19.
I'll make a motion that we approve the addendum number 7 to the business manager's contract as submitted.
Thank you, Rick.
I'll
Second.
second.
Thank you, Kim. Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved. Thank you. Thank you, Drew.
No, no, no.
A motion for item number 20.
I'll motion to approve the agreement by and between the Scotia Glenville School District and Maureen Lazeski and Wilson, as Wilson Certified Trainer.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Sorry, motion. Second? Thank you. Any questions?
Can you clarify for me what a Wilson certified trainer is, please?
Good question.
Wilson is our tier 3, it's Wilson Reading Program, so it is a phonics-based, phonemic awareness phonics-based program. Maureen has gone through two 60-hour trainings and then an additional year-long training to become a Wilson certified instructor to teach other teachers how to teach Wilson. Because she retired mid-year, Wilson allows us to contract with her as an individual for 6 months after she retires at a reduced rate, and then we will only be able to contract with what I lovingly term the mothership after that 6 months. So this is the 6-month contract we're allowed to enter into with Maureen to finish out those Wilson certifications for existing staff members.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved. A motion, please, for item number 21.
I'll motion to accept the December 2022 extra classroom activity report.
Thank you, Kim. And second?
Second.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? So moved. Motion for item number 22, please.
I'll move that we change the hours of the MOA by and between Scotia Glenville Central School District and Scotia Glenville Teachers Association as written.
Thank you, sir.
I'll second.
Thank you. Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? So moved.
Sorry.
Motion for communication.
I just don't remember what that is.
I'll move communications A through J with special note of J, which is the retirement of Jane Tabor at the senior high school, who has been with us for over 34 years. She's just a fixture around here and will be very missed. So I just wanted to call out a special thank you to her. And good luck on retirement. I would also move staffing 1 through 26. I will move placement of students with disabilities with the question, why is the one packet that we got have no comments?
Because we have a brand-new person in there and she's still coming up to speed.
Okay. So we can approve them without seeing the comments? Okay, then I move the placement of students with disabilities.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstained? So moved. Moving on to the rest of the routine business. Motion for the minutes for the regular meeting of January 9th.
I'll motion to approve the minutes for the regular meeting, January 9th, 2023.
I'll
Oh,
second.
Thank you both.
I
Questions?
abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay, thank you. Pam abstains. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Pam abstains. Thank you. Treasurer reports, November 30th, December 31st. Budget transfers, October 22nd, I'm sorry, 22, November 22, December 22, and January of 23. Questions on those? And then item E, the bid. Any questions on that?
We have a number of students who are either in foster care or temporarily homeless. We just can't get to them. So Amazing Grace will provide that transfers.
Do we need a motion on that?
I just have, so the 470 a day, that covers the, like the morning bus run, the afternoon bus run? Is there like a late bus? Is it?
Drew, correct? That's the inclusive cost for the Amazing Grace.
It's amazing.
Amazingly so.
Yep. All right, a motion for the bid.
I'll make a motion that we approve the bid.
Thank you, Rick.
Transportation.
Second.
I'll second.
Kim, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstain? Thank you. Other business?
I have a question. Can somebody point me to exactly where on the website there would be last year's budget? I'm looking under, there's a tab for budget and taxes, and it doesn't seem to be under there or under Board of Education or on the homepage.
I can find out for you,
Okay,
but
thank you.
I would have thought the first place you noted was where we can find it. So let us get that for you.
Okay, thank you. I have a paper copy, but it's, sometimes I just want to do a
Sure.
search.
Any other business? All right, at this time, we will open up the second hearing and privilege of the floor. Again, if anyone would like to address the board, please just state your name and address.
Hi, good evening.
Just speak up.
Good evening. My name is Ranjit Singh. I live in Rudolph Drive in Scotia. I have 3 kids that go to Glen Warden. I'm here to talk about my daughter that's in the 3rd grade right now. So, short and sweet. This time last year, during the budget talks and budget season, the talks about reducing the 3rd grade class from 2 separate classes into 1, 20 plus kids. I was wondering, is that still going to be a thought for next year for the 4th grade class, or is that still going to be separated like usual? I'm not sure if we can make an answer to that right now, or that's something that won't be discussed till after the budget is thought about.
Yeah, that'll be part of our budget process as we do as Susan looks at the students in the school and the classes. So that will be answered in the upcoming meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right, at this time, I'll close the hearing and privilege of the floor and ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Pam. Second.
Me.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you to
Questions
Emily for
about that?
rescuing me.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or sure? Thank you very much.